Real Moms Talking Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast Real Moms Talking. I'm Jovana Torres, your host, and today we are going to talk about messy reality of multilingual parenting. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about my experience raising kids multilingual. So when we talk about multilingual upbringing, in case of our family, I guess my husband and me never really had a clear plan how we are going to do it. And I think it makes sense to go a few steps back and say that when first time my husband and me met, we were both in a very international surrounding, having friends from very different countries, speaking very different languages, and it was never really strange for us to speak English to each other. And it somehow became our relationship language, and it sticks till today. So taking that into account, that we were speaking English on a daily basis, and that my husband's mother tongue is Spanish, and me speaking Serbian as my first language, and that we live in Germany, when our first son was on his way, it was unclear for us how are we gonna deal with this language bundle that we've got, and how are we gonna approach at all language topic when it comes to raising kids. And when our son was finally there, we just went with what felt right. I spoke Serbian to our son, and my husband, he spoke Spanish, and we continued speaking with each other in English. Nevertheless, we were never 100% really strict with this strategy, because sometimes it was just necessary to translate something. One of the first examples that comes to my mind as if we were speaking three of us, and my husband was talking to our son in Spanish, but he wanted me to understand it, he would have to translate it in English in order that I get it. Of course, nowadays the situation is much better because my Spanish is much better and my husband's Serbian is better than it was back then. So when we are now talking with all three of our kids, it's much less of the situations where we need really to translate in English what we are saying in our mother tongue, but nevertheless it happens. One more situation where I always feel need to translate is being in the public with my kids, with other moms and kids that don't speak necessarily my mother tongue. And if I want to say something to my kids that might concern the other kids or the other mom, then I usually speak in German because it feels just right. And one more scenario where it's necessary for us at least to translate what we are saying is when the family is visiting. Because my parents do not speak Spanish and my mother-in-law, she does not speak Serbian. So if I, for example, want to say something to the kids, instead of saying it in Serbian and then translating it in Spanish for my mother-in-law, I would rather say it in Spanish when she's around. But visiting extended family and having extended family visiting is a whole another topic, I would say. And I think every family overcomes that differently or has different rules how they deal with that situations. And I'm not saying that just because I assume, but I think we are kind of lucky. As I earlier mentioned, since we live in very international surroundings still, we kind of have many families that are multicultural around us. And one can see that it really depends on the languages they speak, so on the combination of the languages, on what languages the extended family can speak, and on all these small combinations, how they are going to deal with this family visits situation. In our case, as I said, depending how many people are there, sometimes it just feels easier to say stuff in the language that most of them will understand. But when we have both families around, and that happened for a few times, so my husband's family and my family, that's really still quite demanding in a sense that we need to be translating and switching quite intensively from one language to another, because my family can speak some English and they speak Serbian, but they don't speak Spanish nor German. And my husband's family, they speak Spanish only. And then our kids often speak to us in German. So when we are all together, it looks like really, really fast switching between languages, and depending to whom you speak, you have to switch the language. And then sometimes it happens just that we get confused and start speaking to a person that does not speak, let's say, German in German, or to a person that would normally understand Serbian, I start speaking in English, and so on. It's just too messed up. But still, we manage it. And what I think it's extra funny is that with the years that are passing, our family, our extended family members, so grandmas and grandpas, they start learning stuff in the language that they don't normally speak because they hear it just too many times. And then they don't speak still that language, but they can understand it. Or they can understand many stuff we say to the kids, to each other. So it gets easier with the time. I think everyone adapts. That's what I see. But now if I go a little bit back again to the time when the boys were starting to speak, it's not only that the concerns about how we approach the languages were coming from surrounding, but also I must say that extended family sometimes had concerns if the kids will understand them, how they are going to talk to the grandparents, will they be able to say what they want, will they be able to understand. And what I see now, when we look back, is that actually the process of kids learning to speak languages is, of course, it's not on and off, but it's also not something that happens from today to tomorrow, and then they learn German, but they didn't learn Serbian, or so. Since they are constantly in this situation where they are exposed to their grandparents, to their relatives who speak only certain language, they adapt, and they have sometimes no other choice but to adapt and to try to communicate in the given language. And kids, when you don't sweat it, when you don't emphasize, wow, that's another language, and now you should really focus on that, and you should not speak German, say it, but Spanish or similar stuff, they just pick up on the words, they pick up on the stuff that are spoken in that given language, and they do it. Because they are not thinking of switching the language as is. At that age, they don't even see this as different languages. They just adapt to the given situation. And then how the time is passing, I saw that our oldest, only when he was maybe 4.5, started noticing that there are differences between those languages that he can actually speak and that people speak to him. And that now, with 5.5, approaching 6, he can clearly differentiate and say, hey, that person speaks Serbian to me, or these people are speaking in German, or this is some other language that I actually don't know. So it's amazing how with the time they're developing this ability to put these different languages in different boxes. But on the other hand, it's also amazing how even if when they didn't distinguish the languages, they were able to connect certain words that they need to use with certain person. So it's also nice to see that the worries that maybe grandparents had or that they were raising also went away with all this experience, because they also saw this amazing transition in the kids that they had the periods. Each of our kids, or both our sons, had phases where they would be preferring strongly to speak in Serbian first, because they were spending a lot of time in their first months with me at home. So when they started speaking, at least for our oldest, it was more Serbian. And then he would not be so thrilled to speak in Spanish. But then how the time was passing and he was learning German in the daycare, he would start to favor German over Serbian and Spanish. But nevertheless, he was able always to speak Serbian and Spanish. He was just not choosing to use it. And then with the time, he just opened up to the fact that these people can speak that language, why not? And then started willingly to choose to speak that language. Whereas in the case of our middle son, it's a little bit different. Since he was from the very beginning exposed to German, given that our oldest was speaking German to him and is speaking German to him still, so they speak between each other most of the time, I would say, German. And because of that, our middle child, so our younger son, he always was preferring to speak German. But then when we are, as I said, in, for example, Cuba, we were a few months ago, when we are in Cuba, they both switch slowly to Spanish, and then, funny enough, they start speaking to each other in Spanish, because it just feels, I guess, natural to them. But yeah, my point on this was that also the family saw that this stuff are just happening naturally, and that the kids, they are amazing, like a sponge that takes all that knowledge as sponge would take water, and they just take it and they have it in them, and when they need it, they just use it. So also the family is now more relaxed regarding the fact that kids are speaking a lot of German, but they can also speak Serbian or Spanish when needed. So when I was coming up with the topic for the first episode, I was convinced that this is the right topic, because it's just so often that people that are around us, and maybe that for the first time hears us talking, me and my husband with our kids, they ask how do we do it, and how it works for us, and what ways we deal with family visits, and all these questions that we just talked about. But one more thing that I think is extremely important to think of when it comes to the multilingual upbringing is what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks, and what are the reasons to go at all this path. And I would say usually people don't choose really to be multilingual. It just happens. Like in our case, it feels that there is not much space to wiggle around and to choose other way, because mom talks one language, dad speaks another, and that's it. But once you're in that situation and you are living it, maybe the good thing to mention is what are that stuff that are positive and what are stuff that maybe I wish are not like that, or could be simpler if we would be monolingual. Well, for starters, probably one of the drawbacks is in the beginning, kids have a smaller vocabulary in each language, because they are kind of busy with 4 languages instead of with 1. So that's typical that they have a smaller vocabulary. Also, this mixing of the languages contributes to the sometimes getting into the confusion what the kid wants to say or what we parents want to say. So sometimes the communication is not that smooth. It doesn't happen a lot, but definitely in the beginning and when the kid is learning, it's something that is present. And I will mention one more thing that we heard from many people and were warned, so to say, but it didn't happen to us, is that people say that kids that are speaking more than one language are starting to speak later. Was not our case. I think our kids, both of the boys, started speaking rather on time, and we will see with our daughter, but I think that's very individual, but could happen, and it could be some drawback probably to consider. And now to the good stuff. So what are the benefits? I think the most obvious one is the fact that kids, they are able to communicate in more than one language and with people in different countries. And moreover, not only that they can talk to the people in different languages, but they get to understand the different cultures. They get to know different reasons for habits that people in certain country have. They get to understand the jokes. They get to understand the movies that they watch in that language. So it's much more than just communicating. What I consider one more great benefit is And that's scientifically shown. Kids that are multilingual or already bilingual get to develop their brain in a very different way than if they would speak one language. They are more flexible when it comes to the problem solving. Very often their attention span is bigger, and they have this increased ability to switch through the tasks successfully. So I would say even if they grow not to speak all these languages and they decide to stick only with one of them, these abilities, how their brain works, stays, and that does not go away, which is really amazing and nice to have. And this is definitely one of my favorite topics when it comes to the multicultural parenting, languages, and all this beautiful stuff that comes with many languages. But this was in no way attempt to try to convince anyone that multilingual upbringing is the way or how one should do it. I think, as I said, that's something that comes with the fact that the family is multicultural. And this was rather to give my view on how we do it and how it works for us. I'm sure for other families it's different and everyone does it their own way. So I'm totally curious to hear what you guys do and how do you deal with the language bundle you got. So please reach out and let me know. And get ready for more topics that have to do with multilingual upbringing, because there is still so much more in the hat. So thanks for joining me today and stay tuned for what's coming.